My name is Michael Fowler, and I'm sitting here at Asilomar State Beach near my hometown of Monterey, California. My wife Georgia and I live up here, and this is where our tie-dye business, tie-dye.com, exists. And I founded tie-dye.com back in 1996-97. Well, I've been asked many times what you actually need to tie-dye, and there's a couple basic things which you need no matter what, and those things are nice fiber reactive dye, Procyon dye, 100% cotton fabric or apparel, definitely 100% cotton, at least the fabric. If the thread is synthetic, it's not going to dye, it'll stay white, but the fabric needs to be 100% cotton to really take dye, as well as a dye fixative, and that's an alkali powder which we call soda ash, which is going to create the chemical reaction for the dye to bind with the fiber. Those three ingredients are the three necessary ingredients for tie-dye. Everything else that we're going to use will enhance the tie-dye process, helping you to tie-dye like a professional. Procyon was a patented term that was around for many years, and the patent is now expired on, and you'll see many synthetic or alternative Procyon MX colors. The reason we choose Procyon MX dye to use for our fiber reactive dye is because it's the most color fast and light fast dye that's commercially and readily available on the market and through most mail order stores on the internet, giving us beautifully tie-dyed fabric. All right, we're going to look at some of the basic tools that we need today. One of the first things we need are some measuring devices. Really simple, 1 teaspoon, 1 tablespoon, and a 1/4 cup. Some other simple tools that you may need are a small spatula, just in case you need to get some algae or some dye powder mixed properly in your glass jar. And you may need a whisk. This can be a bar whisk, and this will really allow you to mix your algae, mix your dyes, and your chemicals with this whisk. Another simple tool which we like to use is just a fork. Rubber bands are a great tool, but if you want to take it to the next level, you want to dye like a pro, you really need to have a little more control than a rubber band. And what we're going to use for that is string. We're going to use this cotton string. It's just 100% cotton string. Now keep in mind, all of the tools that you're going to use for tie-dyeing, you want to dedicate those for tie-dyeing. You don't want to wash those and reuse those for culinary usage. That's why your best bet is to go to a secondhand store, a thrift store, and get some measuring spoons, some forks, and other tools you may need, mixing devices, glass jars, because once you start to use them for the tie-dyeing, you really want to keep them for tie-dye purpose because for the safety reasons. Another simple tool that I like to use in my tie-up is known as a heat transfer pencil. Basically what you're looking at is you want to make a mark on fabric that's not going to show up in your finished product, in your dye piece. This pencil allows you to draw on fabric. You can draw a colored line on the fabric, and then when the fabric's gone through the washing machine, you're not going to see that line. It's going to wash out. And you can get this at a sewing supply store. So these are just the bare tools that you need for tie-dye. We're keeping it simple because that's all you need, because what you really need is a technique. And if you have a technique, just using the bare tools you can find at any secondhand store, keep it simple. All right, the next part of our making tie-dye is the scouring process, and that's basically just pre-washing of fabric. Now most t-shirts that you get brand new are going to have already been scoured at the factory, so all you need to really do is use hot water and wash your t-shirt, and that basically prepares it for dyeing. We're going to be putting them in the washing machine with 2 ingredients. Synthropol is just a liquid detergent with no optical whiteners or brighteners, and soda ash, which is also sodium carbonate. Synthropol will actually aid to remove oils and dirt from your white shirt and allow the dye to really take very well. Soda ash is the common name for sodium carbonate. Soda ash is used for 2 parts of tie-dye, and one is the scour and another is as a dye fixative. We're going to be using soda ash today to scour, to clean our fabric for our pre-wash and pre-folding for our tie-dye process. Now we're using new shirts, and our scouring process was done in the manufacturing, so we don't really need too much, but typically we're going to put in about a 1/4 cup of Synthropol, our liquid detergent, in a full washing machine load, and we're going to put in about a teaspoon per gallon of water that we're adding to our machine here. It's very important to have a very clean piece of clothing, and that'll take the dye. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's get this washing machine going and add our ingredients. This is our Synthropol, our liquid detergent, and about a 1/4 cups, a little more than a thumb on our 16-ounce bottle here. Let's squirt that around, and just enough to create a few inches of suds. We have our soda ash, so let's put that in the washing machine. Let's get some t-shirts wet. All right, that's the last of it. That's all of our tie-dye t-shirts in the washing machine for our pre-wash. Some of the chemicals you may also need are algae. And algae is a thickener. It's commonly used in food preparation when they thicken sauces and foods for the production of food. But we're going to use algae to thicken our dye. For low solids like cotton, you want a high viscosity algae, an alginate SH. Another chemical that you use, and then we use in the chemical process to make chemical water, is urea. And urea is an organic nitrogen. It's synthesized, and it's really used for two main things in tie-dye. The first thing is, when you add your dye to the water, you're not actually just adding dye to straight water. Your water is a prepared water. It's known as chemical water. And we're going to see how to make chemical water. But when you use this, you're going to use this urea as one of your primary ingredients of the chemical water. Urea is used for two purposes in tie-dye. It's going to be used for helping to dissolve your dye powder. It's going to really assist in the dissolution in the dissolve process of dye powder. Another thing we use urea for is as a humectant. What a humectant does is it keeps your fabric wet longer so the color can develop. And using urea in your chemical process, in your chemical water, is the ideal way to do it. Well, the recipe for chemical water is very simple, easy to make. You're going to take your blender, you're going to put 4 cups of water, that's 32 ounces, just tap water, straight tap water. Add your urea. You're going to add a 1/4 cup of urea to your 4 cups of water. We're going to use just a standard blender. It's just a cheap blender you can find at any department store. It makes it a little bit easier than using the traditional method, which is a whisk. We like to use these wide mouth glass jars. A lot of brands make these. They're known as mason type jars. And the reason why we use a glass jar is because it's very easy to get the dye to mix properly, especially with this wide mouth. It's very handy because these glass jars are marked on the sides with measurements. So you can measure your cups to accurately have the right amounts of water and chemicals. And they usually come with the lids, and you'll have a lid that comes on the top, and shake it up pretty well to get a nice mixed dye. Another thing we use to wash fabric or to process our tie-dye is a detergent. This detergent here is Synthropol, and it's just a detergent that's going to keep the whites white in the washing machine when you're washing your dyed fabric, as well as in the scouring process when you're doing a pre-scrub of fabric in order to get any type of optical brighteners or whiteners that are in your fabric that were produced when they manufactured the cotton fabric. So this is a detergent. It's a clear liquid detergent, and you put about a finger full into your washing machine prior to dyeing the fabric, as well as after you dye. You put a little bit in your washing machine, about a finger full in this 16-ounce plastic bottle. All right, let's make some chemical water. We're going to make it in the blender first off, and I'm going to take this blender. I've already got it marked 4 cups. All right, well, we have 4 cups of water. What we're going to do is we're going to add a 1/4 cup of urea to our 4 cups of water. So we're adding our 1/4 cup of urea. I'm going to open up the top of this blender, and when the blender's running, I'm going to put in my algae, my thickener. And that's very handy what this little hole in the top of the blender's for. So let's give it a try here. And we want our chemical water to be a nice white color. You can see it still has a little bit of a brown color, a tint from the algae. So the way we can tell that it's mixed properly is that brown color is going to become a white paste color. Let's give it a little bit longer, maybe about 15 seconds. All right, and we are going to divide up our 4 cups of chemical water into 2 jars, 2 cups into each jar. We now have 2 jars of chemical water. We're going to begin tie-dyeing with the tie-up. And one of the simplest tie-ups is known as scrunch fold or scrunch dyeing. And all that entails is taking a t-shirt or a piece of fabric and scrunching it up, keeping it flat, tying it up. So when you put the dye in, it'll create a nice crystal type effect. I like to call that chaos, but it's really just a scrunch fold. Very simple. Everyone can do it. This just came out of the washing machine. It's just been pre-washed. There's nothing really fancy that we've done to it other than the scouring process. We're going to spray it down a little bit, keeping it moist, which is what we do in all of our patterns. And by doing that, we'll create an even moistness so that when we do our fold, all of the fabric will be sticking together and we'll create a duplicate effect. All right, now this fold is very simple. All you really need to do is take a t-shirt or fabric and lay it out flat, and then you can start at any place and basically scrunch it up. It's a very simple fold. It's good to start with. Get the ball rolling a little bit. Now the key to the scrunch fold, if you want to do it like a pro, is keep it flat. Keep it as flat as you can. You don't want it too piled up high, because if you have it piled high, the dye is going to go in a different way. So keep it as flat as you can, but it's not too important on how you scrunch it up. We're just taking our plain basic cotton string and we're going to slide it underneath our piece. And after sliding it underneath our piece, we're going to be wrapping it around, tie it together, and essentially all it really needs to do is hold our piece together, so when we put the dye in, it's going to stay together and keep the effect, the crystal effect that we folded with our scrunch. All we need to remember when we're tying this up is to keep it flat. Don't let it bind up on itself. So I'm going to use my finger on the string, slide it underneath the fabric, and pull it tighter and tighter until it holds it together. Not too tight, just tight enough to stay together. Then all we're going to do is cut our string. And just tie it to any of the string to hold it together. There we go. Well, now that we have the basic scrunch fold done, let's move on a little bit farther to something that you can use in all of your tie dyeing, and that's known as the accordion fold. And just imagine an accordion opening and closing, and that profile from the front of the accordion, that kind of zigzagged profile. Now we're going to put that on fabric, and taking that, once you learn how to do a nice accordion fold, you'll be able to really make tie-dye like the pros. You'll be able to tie-dye at all levels. An accordion fold is used in almost all tie-dye techniques, and we're just going to do a straight line right down the middle of this shirt. This shirt is wet. It came out of the washing machine. It's still wet. It's not soaking wet. It's pretty uniform, but we're going to add a little bit more water with a spray bottle so the top layer of the shirt sticks to the bottom layer of the shirt during folding. Now, just to show you kind of where my line is, I'm going to use a ruler on my piece here. And I've drawn a red line with a heat transfer pencil, and that'll show you an example of my line that I'm going to be folding right up the middle of the shirt. So we're going to start at one end of any piece of fabric, and we're going to kind of take a pinch. Now your first fold will set the size of the other folds, so you want to keep them between a ½ inch and 1 inch maximum. But try to keep it as small as possible, because that way you have real nice uniformly accordion folded pieces going up your piece. And you can see that my reddish line is we're going to follow along that and try to keep that all lined up. So we push the fabric into itself, and we make these kind of accordion type folds, just like an accordion, stretching out or in. Now this is tie-dye. It's fun. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we want to show that this fold is very important, this accordion fold, to use in almost all tie-dye patterns. So it's a combination of actually pushing the fabric and pulling the other portion close to you. Push, pull. And you can always stop, clean it up a little bit. I'm going to wrap the string around this fold here, this accordion fold, and bind it in a certain way that when I put the dye, I'll know exactly where I'm putting the dye to get my color effects. Slide that string underneath the shirt, tie it, pull it together tight. It doesn't have to be very tight, but just enough to hold together. And then I'm going to wrap it around using my finger and sliding along the table, and pull that a little tighter using the finger. And I've just made a nice band where I'm going to put one color right in there during the dyeing process. We'll do that a few more times. There's two colors, one color here, one color there. So this string's actually doing two things for us. One, it's holding the fabric together, so when we tie-dye it, we're going to create a pattern. Two, it's also telling us where we're going to put our color color in each of these parallel bands. And I'm just using my finger down on the string and wrapping it under the shirt. Now at this point, what we have here is an accordion fold across the shirt, and we have a couple options with all this leftover fabric. We can do two things. We can either leave it open, and when we do the dyeing, we can put some dye in and blend the dye together, or we can do something which we already know how to do, and that's the scrunch. So all we need to do then is take this extra fabric here, and let's just do a little scrunch on that. Right around where the accordion fold stops. Sometimes we need to get in there a little bit more and scrunch that up. But let's just do our scrunch right at the end of our accordion fold. Remember, we call that the chaos or the scrunch portion of the fabric or the t-shirt. So we've now actually done three patterns. We've done the scrunch, we've done the accordion, and combining those, we've done a third, the combination of the two. We're just tying that up so it holds together and keeps our scrunch. And we still have one portion of the fabric we need to scrunch up and use the string just to bind it. It doesn't have to be very tight, but tight enough to hold our piece together, our fabric. And that should do it for that. We'll cut our string. And just tie it to the other end of the string, or any other piece of string you can tie it to. And we've now done a beautiful accordion fold, and you can see when you actually look in how nice and clean that fold is. Those folds are relatively the same size. They don't have to be perfect. Tie-dye is very forgiving in that way. We're going to put a color in there, color in there, color in there. And maybe even different or maybe the same colors on the opposite side. So we have a nice scrunch pattern on the sides and a nice accordion fold down the middle. And that line can either be in the middle of a shirt, at a diagonal. You can very highly fluctuate that line. Next we're going to make an earth piece, and I call it an earth because it's like a rainbow coming down your shirt. So when somebody sees it from the side, when it's got that kind of scrunch pattern in the middle, it almost looks like a planet, Earth, kind of a rainbow around the Earth planet. Now the way it's made is basically by adapting a few of our designs we've learned so far, namely the accordion fold as well as the scrunch fold for the chaotic scrunch center portion. What we're going to do is, in order to make the arc of a circle, we're going to use our heat transfer pencil, our sewing pencil, and I put a string. I've tied a piece of string onto it, so when I place a string, I'll be able to create an arc, a fixed arc. All right, let's go ahead and get on our wet shirt here. It's wet from pre-washing, but we need to give it a little bit of spray so it's evenly wet and the back layers stick to the front layer. It's very important on this earth fold to keep the back and the front layers together. All right, now we're going to go ahead and get our sewing pencil, our heat transfer pencil on our string and make an arc on the side of the shirt here. So we're going to start up at the shoulder, starting at the top of the rainbow and you're coming down to the bottom part of the rainbow. So we're going to start up at the shoulder, and you can see about how far you're going to go before you make your arch. Now all this mark really needs to do is to show you where you're going to do your accordion fold around the mark. So when you line up this mark in your fold, it's going to be a straight line. And by incorporating a few of these patterns, you now have the ability to use string or arcs or drawings, and basically anything you can fold that becomes a straight line can be dyed and tie-dyed for beauty. Now we have a rough circle on our fabric. All right, and this is an important piece, that the bottom layer sticks to the top layer, because without that you're not going to have a very even rainbow earth. Now this is one, it's a little bit tricky because you're actually turning the fabric as you do your accordion fold, so it can take a little practice, but keep in mind, as long as your arc line in the finished piece, in the finished fold, becomes a straight line, you should be able to get a very nice earth shape. So we'll concentrate on folding our accordion along that reddish colored arc that we've made, and then we'll go in a little bit later and clean up the outside, but we really want to make sure our arc is round. So let's do our accordion shape, and it requires a push, a little bit of pull, and a little bit of shake of the fabric on the table. So it does help to have wet fabric, but not too wet, because if it's too wet, it's either going to be too sticky on your table, or it's not going to be wet enough where it's going to not be able to slide so well, and the layers of the shirt or the fabric aren't going to stick together. So we're just going to follow our earth right around, all the way around, so this arc becomes a straight line here in our accordion fold area. And if you need to move your fabric, pull it in together, that's okay. Now let's go in and we'll clean up our earth portion, our nice rainbow portion that's going to come around, because we're a little bit messy. And let's clean up this accordion fold. But first things first, so it stays together, we're going to bind that with our cotton string, just so it stays together while we do our cleanup. So we just tie our string right on that arc line, and that's the inside arc of our circle. And we'll go in and find where our folds were and clean those up nice and neat there. Now you're going to find that you're going to need more folds on the outer side because it's kind of turning. So you might need to put in an artificial fold just to get that arc turn. And again, it's kind of a push-pull and clean up. Basically what you're looking at is a nice accordion fold. And if we do our color bands along that, you would have exactly the bands of a colored rainbow. And that's what we're going to do now, is we're going to actually tie that piece up in bands of color all the way up, well, from about the edge of the sleeve from one side to the edge of the neck collar on the other side. And this is where you need that finger slide technique. You need to use your finger, wrap the string around the fabric. So we do here's our parallel color band. We're going to do a diagonal at about a 45-degree angle. You have to kind of hold or push the fabric together. All right, there's another color band. And typically you'll use between 4 and 6 when you make an earth shirt. You'll make about 4 to 6 color bands. And that color band does like it did in the regular accordion fold. It holds the fabric together for dyeing, but also creates a space where you can put a color in during the dyeing process. And right till we get to right past the collar, here we did 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 color bands. We're going to leave the outside of the shirt open where we can put in some color, some light blue, perhaps into some dark blue, maybe even some purple, and bleed that through. But we're going to take the inside of the earth, the center of the earth portion, or what we call the rainbow earth, and we're going to scrunch that up. So the inside is going to be on the side where you made your arc. That's the inside of the earth. We'll turn our shirt and scrunch up the inside. Right around where the arc is it's a little more difficult to do your scrunching, but just force it along and make your scrunch, and then bring the rest of the shirt in together. And that's your scrunch portion of your earth. And just wrap your string around your piece just like you do and you've done in some of the other folds. Now this earth piece, although it's a little complicated, it may help to watch it a few times to see exactly how that's done. Even the many variations that you can get off this earth shirt, this earth fold, will look very good. All right, so let's take a look at the reverse side of our earth and see what it looks like. This is where we're going to stick a few colors in to create our kind of scrunch chaos effect. And this is our colored rainbow in our outside area, which we're going to stick some colors in and just bleed color through. There's an earth. All right, I'm going to show you one more fold, and this fold is, I call it an Indian spiral. And what it is we're just going to be combining some of the patterns we've already learned. One is just the accordion diagonal fold, just a diagonal line across a shirt. After we do our accordion diagonal fold, what we're going to do is we're going to actually spiral the sides. We're going to take our fork and we're going to make our jelly spirals on the sides of our diagonal. We're going to do a diagonal right across from one shoulder down to the bottom of the shirt on the opposite side. And let's get some accordion folding in. Then we're going to take the sides and we're going to use our fork and we'll make our jelly roll spiral and tie that up like a spiral. Just enough to get that spiral going. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, there we go. And we get to a certain point, we can just wrap around manually. Here we go. 2 spirals and an accordion diagonal. All right, now we're going to incorporate a couple other patterns. We're going to use our accordion fold again and our V fold combined together with a third fold to create a lightning bolt V effect on a shirt. It's a very original pattern, really nice, and I'm going to show you how to do it beautifully so you'll be able to really tie-dye like the pros. So what I'm going to do is I'm taking a short sleeve shirt here and I'm going to lay it out flat. It's pre-washed, came out of our washing machine, so it's still wet, but I'm going to give it a little bit more water. Well, now that we have a nice uniform wetness, what we're going to do is we're going to fold our shirt in half right down the middle. So from sleeve to sleeve, I'm going to fold that in half. Then we're going to clean our shirt up so it's nice and clean. Okay. All right, well, here's where we're going to take it up a notch. And what we're going to do is we're actually going up about halfway into the sleeve. We're going to make a pinch. And we're going to fold that up onto itself. What you're doing is just folding the shirt up onto itself. Now when you can imagine when you fold something onto itself and then you form a V, when you open it up you're going to create a zigzagged lightning pattern, and that's exactly what we're trying to do here. Alright, we've now done our lightning folds. Now let's make our V just like we would a normal straight V from shoulder. We don't want to take it all the way down to the bottom of the shirt. Keep it up about a few inches, a couple inches from the bottom of the shirt on your V. This is going to show up real good. This red line that I'm drawing. And then we're going to do our accordion fold, which we already know how to do, straight up along our V. If you need a little more water at this point, it doesn't hurt to add a little more water to your shirt to give it a nice evenly wetness. And then we make our accordion fold. Now you're going to be working with much thicker fabric, so don't be alarmed if you can't keep it all the same size. It's okay. Just get it the best you can on that accordion fold, and of course practice will make perfect. Alright, we've made our V fold, our accordion V fold up our lightning, and we're just going to tie that up and bind that together. It doesn't need to be as tight as some of the other shirts because it's thicker and the dye is going to need to get in there and really blend well in that fabric. So we'll keep it tight but still loose enough and bind up that shirt, making our nice color bands. Tie it together so it stays together for the dyeing process. There's a lightning bolt. Let's go ahead and take some techniques that we already know, namely the accordion fold and the scrunch, and combine those in a way that we can make a V coming up the shirt. And in the middle of the V, we're going to put a scrunch chaos type of effect. And the way you do that is just lay your shirt out flat, and you're going to fold that shirt from shoulder to shoulder. So the whole middle of the shirt is going to be on the left side of your fold over, left or right side. And we'll straighten it up so it's relatively even, so the middle of the shirt is indeed the middle of the shirt. Now if you're going to make a V pattern, you like to make a shape that really actually looks like a V. So the way we're going to do that is just to make our V basically from the shoulder down towards almost to the bottom of the shirt. You don't want your V to come all the way down to the bottom, but you want it to come down towards the bottom of your shirt. And then once we have a line, all we need to really do is to take some techniques we already know and make an accordion fold right up that V. So this is how versatile our accordion fold is, because we're able to translate just a flat accordion fold, and now we can make a V with the scrunch effect in the middle of the V. keeping the folds nice and uniform, all about the same size, all about a 1/2 inch or so in height. We used a red line to make our line in the shirt, and we'll try to line up that line so that the V, the outside of the V shape, is going to be very defined when we actually add the dye, because we're going to put our string right parallel to that when we tie our piece up. The accordion fold can take a little bit of practice, but even the first time you should be able to have good results. And we're going to tie it up in the same way we did our straight accordion fold on the shirt, and that's just to make parallel color bands. One, to hold the shirt together so it stays together until we dye it, but also to tell us where to put those colors. And our tie-up is never really that tight. It's just tight enough to hold the piece together, maintain a nice pattern. Now our V shape is going to be created by the fact that one, we did our accordion fold in the shape of the V on the shirt, but also because that's where we're going to put our color in that area. And we're just about done here with our tie-up. And I'll leave the border around the V area. I'll leave that open for a bleed effect, but I'll take the center of the shirt and do a scrunch up in the V-neck collar area of the shirt. If you'd like to do the scrunch around the whole shirt, it's very easy to do, and that's the best thing about tie-dye, is once you know the basic techniques, you can then add those to each other, add and subtract, and come up with your own to really experiment and get a truly original, one-of-a-kind work of art. There we go. We've just made a nice V-shirt with a nice scrunch pattern in the V-neck area. All right, we're going to go ahead and make an earth tapestry. I'm going to take this twin size sheet here, I'm going to fold it in half and in half again, and then half it one more time to work with 1/8 of this fabric. That means everything I do on 1/8 will be replicated 8 times to make a circle. And that's exactly what I'm going to do with this piece. I'm going to take this piece of string with my heat transfer pencil here, and I'm going to make a nice arc on this fabric to make an earth. It's very similar to what we did on a t-shirt, but it's going to be much larger scale, very grandiose and gorgeous. The fabric that we're working on right here is pre-washed and scoured. It's ready to be sprayed a little bit more with water, just so the layers of the fabric will stick together nicely in our earth fold. It's very important that we fold all of the layers of the fabric when we do that, so we'll just use water to get those to stick together. This is my center of my fabric right here on the left side, and on your right side you're going to see me take this corner and make a triangle just like so. Now you can see on this edge that this edge would actually be the short width of the fabric, or from top to bottom if we went long ways on our fabric, from top to bottom. So we don't want to take our earth really past that. That way the whole piece will be on the whole earth design will be on the rectangular piece of fabric. If we went actually above that and made our arc farther up, two sides of our earth would be cropped into, which creates a nice effect as well. And I've got my finger, one finger down at the point, or the center of the earth piece, so the center of the fabric, and I'm going to hold the string there with my finger, and I'm going to use this heat transfer pencil, and I'm going to make an arc. I'm attempting to keep my pencil as straight as possible, or as perpendicular to the table. There we go. There's a nice arc. Now this is a great chance to see this arc right here will be reflected 8 other times to make a full circle, which is why we use a string. We want to get it as round as possible. For example, if we wanted to make an octagon, we could just make a straight line there and we would have 8 octagons reflected around a piece of fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and fold my accordion fold, and the way I'm going to do it on this earth piece is line up that red line, and I want to try to make that as straight as possible. So let's go ahead and do that. Doing an accordion fold on a large piece of fabric like this is a little bit tricky, so it's a combination of pushing and pulling and also holding the fabric together as you're doing that. And when you get down towards the end, you may actually have to manually get in there and do that. So there's our round arc. Now let's go ahead and tie that up so our line will stay together as we manipulate the fabric. I'm going to wrap a few pieces around there just to tighten it up. And I'm going to clean up my earth area. So this area all right here is going to be my nice rainbow around my earth piece. And the way I need to do that is just to go in and find my folds and clean them up a little bit. The farther we get from our center point of our rainbow effect, we'll have more fabric to work with, so we have to do something with it. You can feel that one layer doesn't really stick to the next, so what you need at that point is just to put a little more water. That way we get the same earth pattern on all of the layers of the fabric. So it's a bit of a hand manipulation, but you can see that slowly it's getting a little cleaner, slowly but surely here. There we go. That's our nice accordion fold for our earth band that goes around our chaos central area. So let's go ahead and tie that up. So we'll have to hold this together at the same time we're doing that. So we're going to actually work backwards today. I'm going to holding my string down with my finger here on the table. I'm going to put a band at the outer layer of my earth and work back by creating a few color bands. Anywhere between about 4 and 6 color bands, usually on an earth, will create a nice rainbow effect. I'm going to take the back end of a fork here or some other utensil that's not going to pierce the fabric. You don't want to use this end of the fork because it'll put a hole in your fabric, so we're just going to use the round end. So you can see as I get the fork in there that it's making the fabric kind of level out. It's just because the fabric has a tendency to pop up during your fold. You can get in there manually as well and do a little cleanup. Just a few simple things will help you to die like a pro here. You can see the back side of our fold, relatively clean. When we do our coloring, we're actually going to get our color into each of those folds with our 16-ounce squirt bottles. This whole area is going to be the center of the earth piece, and I'm going to do a little bit of a scrunch on that. And that's what actually creates a planetary effect, very similar to an earth, which is why I call this piece an earth. You're working on 8 thicknesses of fabric, and because of that, you're actually going to create a replication 8 times of this chaotic scrunch pattern. So you're actually going to have an asymmetrical pattern that's shown symmetrically. Quite an interesting effect. So let's go ahead and tie that up. Let's go ahead and cut our string, tie it to itself. And we have just folded an earth tapestry. I'm going to take a twin size sheet here and fold it in half and in half again, and eventually get down to an eighth, or a small triangle that represents an eighth of our overall piece of fabric. And what I'm going to do with that is make a kaleidoscope. Taking my wide long area and going end to end, and then I'm going to fold that in half from top to bottom. And then what I'm working with is 1/4 of my overall piece of fabric at this point. I'm going to clean that up nice. So what I have in my right hand, which you see on your left side, is actually the center of our piece of fabric at this point. Let me clean that up a little bit before I spray it down. This twin size sheet here has been pre-washed and scoured, so it's ready to be dyed. But I'm just going to add a little bit of water so the layers of fabric stick together as in our other pieces. Let's go ahead and take this 1/4 of our piece here, this 1/4 piece, and we'll make a triangle. This is my center of fabric. And there we have 1/8. So this piece right here is 8 layers thick of fabric, and reflected 8 times will create a beautiful kaleidoscope in a circle, which we're going to do now. But first we'll add a little more water so the layers stick nicely. And let's make a nice ring with our heat transfer pencil, which represents the ring around the kaleidoscope. So that small arc reflected 8 more times will create a beautiful circle ring. And in order to make it a little easier to make my accordion fold, I'm going to add a little more water in the area of my accordion fold so the layers of fabric will stick together quite nicely. And let's get this fold along this arc and make that look as close as we can to a straight line. doing this kaleidoscope pattern as an 1/8 instead of a 16th allows me to get a little bit cleaner in my folding. I'm able to work with a little bit smaller accordion fold here. Bring that in. You can always lift your fabric up from draping off the table if it begins to get a little heavy. And I'll just manually fold that one at the end. And before I do anything, I'm going to tie that up. So now our nice pinkish red arc line is now a straight line. I'm going to go ahead and tie this arc line into a relatively straight line here. And that reflected 8 times is going to create our beautiful circle ring around our kaleidoscope. Let me go in and clean up some of these folds that have kind of popped up. And then I can bind my ring with string to keep it together. Now here I'm going to do a couple color bands around my kaleidoscope. So I'm working with the end of the fabric, or the top and bottom on the shorter side. Now let's go ahead and tie a few color bands around there. Our string is being used to hold the fabric together, as well as to give us an idea where we're going to put our color. As you pull the fabric closer together, it has a natural tendency to begin to pop up, so just pop it back down. And you may have to do that when you get ready to do the dyeing on this piece. Alright, so we just did 3 color bands. I'm going to take the round side of my fork here and poke it into the fabric a little bit to straighten that up, just to keep it all relatively level. And then I'm going to wrap my string around another time. All right, let's get on to our kaleidoscope. So we now have 3 bands of color that's going to go around our kaleidoscope. I have a little bit more fabric to work with here as we're working on an 1/8 versus a 16th. I've added a little bit of water to this fabric just so it'll stick together a little better. And I'm going to take a pinch here and fold it up right up to the ring. So I have a nice pinch of fabric folded over. And what's going to happen there is if I fold an accordion fold at my angle, I'm going to create a kaleidoscopic reflection on fabric. Let's take that in there, and then we'll fold this one up onto itself. Here's my color rings. Here's my lightning fabric folded up onto itself. I'm going to fold an accordion fold about 45 degrees for my rainbow bands which go around the kaleidoscope. Right about there. I'll go ahead and draw that on my fabric just so you can see that by doing an accordion fold. It's a little bit tricky the first few times, but as long as you get that right angle and tie it up, you will get the kaleidoscope. And then it's just a matter of a little bit of practice. Okay, so what you're looking at is basically some scrunched fabric, which looks very rough, but actually when we get our color bands and bind that together, which we're going to do right now, it'll allow it to take shape as a kaleidoscope. When I first developed this design, it was actually a design that came to me during the night when I was sleeping, and I figured out how I would do this just by incorporating a kind of lightning fold into the center of an earth. But it was quite an interesting experience to do it in your subconscious in the middle of the night. And it's just, ever since, it's been a really nice pattern to fold. Originally I called this pattern smokestack lightning because it looked like a kaleidoscopic smokestack, and also reminded me of the Grateful Dead song called Smokestack Lightning, an old blues song. Bind up my center a little bit better. Cut my string and tie it up. me show you what we have here. Well, we have this central area. We're going to put a color here, and each of these color band areas that I've folded will represent a nice kaleidoscope. So this area was this is 1/8 of our overall sheet, and these 3 color bands are going to be the rings around our kaleidoscope. And then this outer area, we're going to put a few colors in, and we're going to bleed some color through. It's very nice to use the same colors that you used in your kaleidoscope to bleed out through the outside, especially as you have a nice border from your kaleidoscope to the bleed with these 3 contrasting color bands. Let's go ahead and fold a simpler tapestry design, and this one we're going to do is a spiral, similar to what we did on a t-shirt design, just a larger scale fabric. What we're working on today is a twin size sheet, and it's approximately 66 by 96 inches, and it'll give us a good start into how to fold tapestries. I'm just going to put this piece of fabric over my table and give it a little bit of water. It's been pre-washed, but we're going to give it a little bit more water so the fabric will stick together a little bit better. Just slightly wet. Then we're going to take a fork, just like we did in our t-shirt designs. I'm going to pick a spot in the center of our twin size sheet here and just get a little pinch, and I'm going to use that fork to give me a little bit of leverage as I'm spinning my jelly roll spiral on this piece of fabric. If your fabric tends to get a little bit heavy, which it may do, it's very easy to just pull some of the fabric up onto your table to compensate for some of that weight and that pull of the fabric. So just wrap that fork around, and what you really want to do is concentrate on keeping the piece of fabric as low to the table as possible. We don't want it to build up into a round hump piece. We just want it to stay nice and low on the table. Now when we get to a certain point, the fork really isn't going to help us much, so we just remove that fork and we'll just wrap the fabric around in a spiral manually. And that's a nice easy way to get a nice round spiral. Then we just want to take some string and bind that spiral together so it'll hold together until the dyeing process. And to wrap that string around the fabric, I'm just going to use a finger, hold down that string, and that'll make it nice and easy. Use that finger, hold down the string, that finger again, and that'll allow me to get that string nicely underneath our piece here. All right, just cut that string and tie it up. And there we have a nice spiral tapestry. And you can see on the back side our jelly roll spiral coming out from the center. And in this example we have a fabric that's about 2 inches thick. And you really want to keep it as thin as you can, but this will work just perfectly when we add our color in. A very popular design to fold on a tie-dye tapestry is a mandala. Now you can imagine a mandala as an 8-pointed flower on a piece of fabric. And there's a lot of ways to do this design, but I'll show you one way to do it. And we need to get down to our 16ths, just like we have in some of our other designs. We have a quarter sheet right here, and we want to get it nice and evenly moist, so I'm going to give it a little bit of water, and that's going to keep all 4 layers sticking together nice and evenly. I'm going to take this quarter and I'm going to make an 1/8. Here's our approximate center of our piece at the top, and I'm going to take the outsides of the top and bottom and fold it over. So what we now have here is an 1/8 of the sheet of fabric, and this means that what you see on this piece, whatever coloration or anything we do on this piece, any fold or design, will be replicated 8 times on our finished final piece. And we'll take it a little bit farther, folding a 16th. All right, now this top portion here represents the exact center of our fabric, and I'm going to get in here and clean it up a little bit. And we can see, if we open up the fabric, we can actually see the outsides of the top and bottom of the side right here. So anything we do up in this area is only going to be on the outside portion of our piece. I'm going to wet it again. Now to imagine what a mandala is going to look like, let's draw half a petal of a flower, for example. And this line I just drew is going to be reflected 16 times to make 8 petals of that shape. If we just folded along this line, we would have a beautiful petaled mandala with the center where maybe we put one color, maybe we put a few colors. but let's try something a little bit more detailed, a trick of the pros. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually put a snowflake inside the center of the mandala. We're going to fold this towards our point, and we want our point, which is the center of the fabric, to be slightly into our mandala. Okay, and now if you need to see that a little bit easier, we can draw that on our point. So our tip is folded over the edge, and we're going to make an accordion fold up along this red line, this reddish colored line, and that's going to be our border of our mandala with a snowflake because of the amount of reflections. So actually, if you look at the tip of this fabric, it's actually 1/32 of the overall piece of fabric, because we've taken a 16th and halved that in a way so that it's going to be reflected like a kaleidoscope to create a snowflake effect in the center of our piece. So let's go ahead and do that accordion fold starting down here at the bottom. Now your fabric's a little bit thick, so you need to always squeeze it, slide it, and work with it in order to get your shape. And when it gets too thick or too much fabric for your hands to hold together, you can kind of move around, and you might manually need to coerce it into its position until your line is approximately a straight line. And we can always get in and clean that line up a little bit. And then we're going to put a piece of string approximately on our line to bind the fabric together. And we're going to use some string and tie our line up in an approximately straight line. And let's wrap that string around a few times using our finger, so we'll be able to keep that together. Now that we have our border line of our mandala flower, we're going to tie some color bands in to add some intricate color patterns inside our mandala. And we wrap it at an angle, and then straight across. Your fabric has a tendency to buckle or bind, so you may want to tie a few more back at the end of your piece just to keep it to stay together. Our outside point is not the center of the fabric anymore, but actually the center of each petal. We'll have just folded a tie-dyed mandala. Let's take a look at the reverse side of that to get a better idea about what we did. Here on the end point, here on the end, is actually not the center of the fabric, but the center of the petal, of the 1/16 petal. And this pattern, it's a little bit complicated, so you may want to review that a few times and try it a few different ways, and actually just learn by doing. Just give it a try and see what the results end up to be. There's a mandala. We have a quarter sheet right here. If I put some dye here, it's going to be reflected 4 times. And that's very important, because as we make further folds, we'll actually be replicating as many times as our folding will require. So what I have on the table now represents 1/4 of our piece. What I have in my right hand is this actual center of the piece, and hanging off to the bottom is the outside edges of the piece. Now that I have this 1/4 piece of the fabric here, I'm going to clean it up a little bit, because I want it to be nice and neat when I make my 1/8 and then a 16th fold, which I'm going to show you how to do that. In order to keep these 4 layers to stick together nice and evenly, I'm going to give it a little bit more water. And we want those layers to stick together, so when we do a fold, it's going to replicate. It's going to geometrically replicate, just like you would maybe a cutout snowflake or in some origami paper folding. And I'm going to actually fold a triangle right here. So what I still have at this point right here is the center of our fabric. What I want to show you here is, this is an 1/8. If I fold it again in a triangle, if I divide this in half right here and fold it over onto itself, which I'll do in a moment, and have a 16th, we will have 16 reflections of this exact angle. So it's very important that we learn how to do this, because you'll be able to use this technique in all of your different folds for large tapestries. When you work with a large piece of fabric, it makes it much easier if you work in a smaller scale and have it replicated out into a larger scale, which is what we're doing right now. Okay, now our layers are very evenly moist, and I'm going to fold that over one more time. So this small wedge piece kind of looks like a small slice of pie here, is the exact replication or the exact division of the large piece of fabric. This is 1/16. And again, we'll give it a little bit of water so the layers stick together. Let's take a look on the inside just to see what that looks like. Okay. All right, this line right here, you can imagine if this line right here was folded with an accordion fold and we put dye into that line, that it's going to actually create an 8-pointed star. Now basically when we do our accordion fold up this tapestry, we want this line that we drew to line up straight or relatively straight. So we're working with a lot more fabric, so your accordion fold is going to be about twice as big as it would be on a normal t-shirt, depending on whether you're using, say, a twin size sheet or a full queen or king size sheet. And let's tie a piece of string right up on our line there. And then I'll wrap a piece of string around a couple times using my finger to hold that together. And that line will be the outside line of our star. So we'll tie a couple color bands going back. And I'm just using my finger on that string to allow me to bring the string underneath the fabric, making it nice and easy. Now we're still left with a fair bit of fabric, this outside area which is the outside border of the star, and this inner area which we're going to do a scrunch fold on to give it a little color and contrast in the center of our star. So let's go ahead and do this crunch chaos type of stuff in the center. And there's not too much fabric to work with, so we just really need to bunch it up, scrunch it up, and tie it to bind it together. Let's cut the string. Tie it to another piece of string, and take a look at the clean side of our star here. And between our lines of string, which are doing two things, our string's holding the piece together, as well as creating an area where we're going to put each color in the dyeing process. And this area is our chaos scrunch area, which we're going to put in a few colors of dye to create a nice tie-dyed chaos effect. And there we have an 8-pointed star and our outside bleed area where we're going to put a few colors in and squeeze that through to get a nice bled color effect. Each of my wide mouth mason type jars have 2 cups of chemical water which we mixed, and I'm adding an average of 2 tablespoons of dye. Some colors fluctuate a little more, a little bit less. For example, black. When you mix a black, the average ratio for this 2 cups of chemical water is 5 tablespoons, but most colors we're just going to average 2 tablespoons and make our mix. Okay, now we have our mixed Procyon dye mixed in with our chemical water. We're going to add soda ash, the dye fixative. That is the chemical that actually causes the dye to react with the fabric and create a bond. And in each of our wide mouth mason jars we have 2 cups of chemical water mixed with 2 tablespoons of dye, with the exception of black where we put 5 tablespoons of dye. And we're going to mix 1 teaspoon of soda ash, which is our dye fixer, and that's going to allow the dye to mate and be fixed with the fabric to make it permanent and so it doesn't wash out. Let's go ahead and add a teaspoon. There's a teaspoon of soda ash in with our Procyon dye, and we'll give it a good shake to mix up that soda ash with our chemical water and dye mixture. Excellent, we now have active dye ready to be tie-dyed. I've gone ahead and labeled each jar and each bottle with the corresponding color because it's very difficult to actually tell, with the exception of black here, what a dye color is when it's mixed with water. This method of tie-dyeing, which we use with these 16-ounce bottles, you can see has a Yorker type point here, is known as direct application. We actually use bottles to directly apply the dye to the fabric because it gives us a lot more control with regard to sticking the color where we want our color, how much color in the fabric, and how it's going to react. Now I'm choosing to use 16-ounce plastic bottles because I have 16 ounces of dye mixture, and it works perfectly for having a full jar mixed with dye and chemical water to fill up one of our 16-ounce bottles. And you can see as I poured it, I saw that we had a real nice even color with no loose soda ash. It's well mixed and good to go. We're getting ready to do some pigment dyeing, and what I mean by pigment dyeing is very different from traditional tie-dye and dyeing techniques. A lot of dyers have likened this process to the difference between a radish and a beet. And a radish represents pigment dyeing in that the red color on the white meat of a radish is how the paint or the pigment dye is going to sit on top of the fabric. Whereas traditional dyeing, we use Procyon MX cold water fiber reactive dyes. For our traditional dye, our Procyon dye, it actually is more like a beet in which the color is of the red beet and the outside is very similar. So the color on, if you looked at a traditionally dyed piece of fabric, the color is going to be the same on both sides, whereas with a pigment dyed technique, the color is going to remain on one side. The advantage of using on Procyon dye like we do in our dye studio is that it'll give us very vibrant colors which are going to be very permanent and last, and the color is going to be very vibrant and beautiful. Now when we do pigment dyeing, we're going to get beautiful colors, but it's more of an aesthetic piece. Pigment dyeing works very well on an aesthetic piece like a large wall hanging or tapestry because it's not really designed to be washed and washed. There's a great benefit to doing pigment dyeing over tie dyeing, but it's a very different technique, so they suit different purposes. There are a couple of very good reasons why you would choose pigment dyeing over Procyon, and one of those reasons is if you have a chemical aversion. So if you don't want to work around a lot of chemicals, or for health reasons you're not able to do so, you can still do some nice tie-dye and get some nice effects using pigment dyeing. And the main reason is you don't need soda ash or a dye fixer to cause your chemical reaction. You don't need other chemicals like Synthropol or urea to make your chemical water. All you need really is medium viscosity Liquitex acrylic paint in this example and water. Very simple procedure. Another reason you might choose pigment dyeing over traditional Procyon dyeing is that you have a lack of water, or you aren't able to have a water supply around you because you need a lot of water to do traditional dyeing. So pigment dyeing, all you really need is 8 parts of water to 1 part pigment, or example, in our 2-ounce example, we have 2 ounces here, and we would add approximately 16 to 20 ounces of water to create our dye mixture. In order to make pigment dyeing accessible to the most amount of people, I found a very nice product which works beautifully for pigment dyeing. There's a lot of things you can use, airbrush ink or any type of acrylic paint, but most acrylic paints, if you try to dissolve in water to create your dye, will not dissolve 100%, which is why we use Liquitex. I use a medium viscosity Liquitex paint which is easily found in any art and frame store or art and craft store or on the internet, and the benefit of using Liquitex medium viscosity is that it's going to dissolve 100% in our bottle. We work with the same type of bottles as we do in other types of tie-dye, namely just a 16-ounce clear plastic bottle. I like to use the wide mouth type just because it's wider and easier to mix colors in. I'm going to add approximately 2 ounces of medium viscosity Liquitex acrylic paint to 16 ounces of water. And what I'm going to do with that is by diluting it in the water, I'm going to create a type of dye which when I put on the fabric is going to really have a nice flow. It's going to have a nice flow, but when it dries it'll give me a little bit of hand. And what's going to happen is I'm going to dye it just like a normal dye process, just like normal tie-dye, but then being outside the sun and the air is going to draw the moisture out of our color and it's going to leave our color on the fabric. It's going to allow us to create beautifully intricate details in tie-dye and really some extravagant pieces and allow us to really make some fantastic pieces which we're not able to make using traditional tie-dye techniques. Small jars of Liquitex, just found in any art and frame store, art and craft store. It's very easy to find medium viscosity Liquitex color. Well, we now have all our dye and chemical mixed, and we're ready to get our hands dirty and do some tie dyeing. We're going to do some tie dyeing today, our direct application method, on top of the sink. And we have a milk crate in the sink where we're going to put our pieces on top of some newspaper and use our bottles, our 16-ounce bottles with the Yorker tops, and squirt the dye into those fabrics. I've lined up my dye colors in order from scarlet red to black, so I'm able to identify which colors I need to use to grab while doing that. If you're working with lots of blues and greens, it's helpful to put those in the order from light to dark or dark to light, however you'd like to remember how to use those. So I've just lined those up to make it convenient while tie dyeing. Okay, let's add some dye to an earth piece. This is an earth rainbow piece, and it'll take a little bit of practice to see exactly what you folded and to recognize it and know this is an earth piece. And I know this is a scrunch portion or a nice chaos portion, and I know this outer area is going to be my bleed area where I'm going to put a few colors in and squeeze that through. And here are my color band areas where I'm going to put some color in. A lot of people use an immersion method for this type of scrunch crystal effect. It's called low water immersion. But we're actually going to put the dye with the bottles into our scrunch chaos areas. And you want to start with your lighter colors and then put your heavier colors. That way you'll get a nice color effect. If you go dark to light, your light colors really won't show up as vibrant. So let's start with a nice baby blue. Just poke that bottle right down into the chaos of the shirt. In a small earth area, a small chaos area like this, it's good to use 2, maybe 3 colors at the most. That way you'll have a nice concentration. You'll still have a little bit of white area to give it some contrast. We'll throw a little purple in there. And back on the first side. Okay, let's get into our earth area. Now you have to imagine this area towards the outside of the shirt is the outer ring of the earth rainbow, and here's our inner ring. So I'm just going to stick with some rainbow colors, keep it nice and simple, and you can do any color variation you'd like to. But we'll start here on the outside with a little bit of red. And we'll go on with the next color. And another color. Back to our bright green. And I'm going to even put a little turquoise right in here. Nice pretty turquoise color. Alright, there's one half of our earth. Now we're going to flip that right over. I'm going to work with some complementary colors on the other side, putting some green into the red here. And into the orange, I'm going to put a little bit of dark blue. And a little purple into the yellow. Back to our scarlet red, into some green. And a little bit of yellow into our purple. Okay, now all we have left to dye is our outer bleed area. We're just going to bleed some color out. The prettiest way to do this is to use the same colors you used on your inner scrunch chaos area on the outer bleed. So we're going to go back to our baby blue. Into a little bit of purple. And we're going to turn that over one more time and do the same thing. And we're going to give our shirt a little squeeze, make sure the color ran all the way through. And my bleed area, I'm just going to squeeze that color, that nice pretty blue, into that purple there. With a nice, there we go. And you can see that all the white areas are now colored. So let's go ahead and wrap that up in some newspaper and wrap it in plastic wrap. And just like you'd wrap a fish or some type of meat or cooking item, maybe at the butcher. And then we're going to take that wrapped shirt and put it in plastic wrap. Or a plastic bag works just as well. And folding it onto itself so it'll get a nice airtight wrap here. And just set it aside and let it sit for 24 hours and we'll have a finished earth tie-dye t-shirt. Okay, let's get into tie-dyeing a lightning t-shirt. And I can tell by looking at this that this is a lightning V coming down the shirt with a nice bleed area on the outside and a scrunch chaos area in the middle. So let's go ahead and get some color in there. I'm going to start with my lighter color first in the scrunch area again. A little bit of yellow perhaps. Just a little bit of color on both sides. And I'll put in a little bright green and a little bit of dark blue. Alright, I'm going to get into my lightning areas now. Doing the lightning, it's better to have the brighter colors towards the outside and the darker colors towards the inside. Now with a lightning shirt, you really need to get that bottle into each layer. So just get into the folds of the fabric and squeeze a little dye in there. And we're just going to turn that over and do the other side. We're going to do our bleed area on the back, and we're going to use similar colors to the colors we used up in the chaos scrunch area. Had a little yellow in there, and a little bright green. And a little dark blue. We'll put some dye on the other side. Again, our yellow, our bright green, and our dark blue. And we're going to give it a good squeeze for our bleed area. We want those colors to blend real nicely. You can see a little bit of white in there, so we want to give it a little more of a squeeze. Get rid of all that white. And we're almost done with this piece. We're just going to give it a little bit of squeeze in the center area just to make sure our lightning bled through really nice. Okay, and that's going to be a gorgeous bleed on the outside of this shirt. A little bit of white, but that's okay. So let's go ahead and wrap that up in some newspaper and plastic, and it's ready to rest for 24 hours. And tomorrow we'll open that up and see a nice beautiful lightning tie-dye t-shirt. Alright, I'm going to do a scrunch chaos piece of fabric. You can see it's all kind of scrunched up and tied. I'm going to start with my lighter colors and work my way into my darker colors so they'll have a nice color effect. If you go the other way around and start with your darker colors and go light, it's not going to show up so much. Your lighter colors won't show up as easy. Now this scrunch technique, you can really put the color in any way. Just make sure you get enough color into the fabric. Just stick that bottle right into the fabric. It's good to use a similar color on the other side to give it a nice continuity in the shirt. I'll put a little bit of yellow in there. Just a little bit though. And I'm going to add a little bit of green. At this point it looks a bit like a circus piece, but actually when I add a little bit of a darker color, those bright colors are going to add a nice contrast to our darker blues and purple that I'm going to put in. And let's try a bit of a darker green to start giving it a greater contrast of brightness. And you can see our piece is starting to get a lot darker. We'll flip that over. And we'll put a little blue in there. And even a little bit darker blue. And the last color, we're going to put a little bit of purple in. At this point, it looks very dark, and it looks like it's really going to be a dark piece. But you'll see after you wash it, it's going to be very bright and vibrant, and you'll actually see all of the colors we put in. So this piece will be very exciting to see when it comes out of the dryer, when it's finally done. We're going to start off with one of our folded spiral pieces, and it's very simple to tell. You can see our folded rounded spiral here. It's one of the easiest pieces to fold, and it's even easier to tie-dye. And just a couple simple things. You want to actually add your color just like a piece of pie. When you dye a spiral piece, it's very helpful to use up to about to use 3 or 4 colors. Any more and your piece can get a little too complicated. So let's go ahead and get some color in there, and we'll start just doing simple colors of the rainbow. We want to get our bottle tip right into the fabric, so you can see there's our slice of pie right in here, and we want to get our tip into the fabric. Now when you're dyeing, you may have a tendency to splash some of the dye, so it's very helpful to wear safety goggles or some type of eye protection. Here we're going to do a nice strong orange right next to there. You want to get that tip of your 16-ounce bottle right into the fabric. Alright, let's go ahead and put a little yellow on this slice of pie. And we'll put a bit of bright green on this last slice. Now we're going to turn it over and do the other side. It's okay if you get a little dye into the other colors. It's fine. It just mixes up and gives it a nice texture. So we'll go ahead and just flip that over. Now at this point we have the option of putting the same color on top of each other or using different colors. What I'm going to do is actually just something really simple. I'm going to put a complementary color on each. For example, I'll put a nice blue on the orange, a nice green on the red, and maybe a purple on the yellow. And that'll give us a nice complicated spiral and really be pretty. I'm going to put a nice deep blue, a nice midnight blue right on top of our orange here. And you can always give it a little bit of a squirt around. And let's put a little bit of dark green on our red. And you can see when the dye is liquid, it's very difficult to tell the difference between green and blue and any of the darker shades. That's why we have our bottles labeled. And we'll put a little more red on our green. And finally, a little bit of purple on our yellow. Okay, well, we finished dyeing a spiral here, and we did a simple color pattern, basically a complementary color scheme, using our color complements on the opposite side. It's very easy to do, it's fun, it's fast, it's easy, you'll get great results, and it's a good way to get the juices flowing to tie-dye. Now the next phase of our shirt here is what we do with most of our tie-dye. After we've actually done the tying, we've done the dyeing, is I'm just going to fold the newspaper up around our piece, and that'll keep all the dye, that'll keep all the loose dye, that little excess dye in with the piece and not allow it to bleed and run all over other areas. With this spiral here, since it's a little bit thicker than some of the other shirts, I want to get the color into some of the other lower areas. So I'm going to give it a little bit of a push or a squeeze, a little bit of a press, not too hard, doesn't need to be too hard, but just enough to ensure that the color is penetrating that shirt. When you finish dyeing your shirt and wrap it in newspaper, you need to cover it in plastic so it'll remain airtight and moist for a period of between 8 hours and 24 hours. And the reason you need to do that is so the color binds with the fabric. On average, I'll let my shirts sit for approximately 24 hours just in case. Some colors like turquoise need the 24 hours to fully develop and get their vibrancy. We're going to use saran wrap to wrap our piece. It also works very well to use a large plastic bag. Sometimes I even use large ice bags, which you can get at a restaurant supply store. A bag that you'd put blocked ice in. That way it's large enough to cover this piece. Just tie it around and it'll stay moist for your 24-hour period. So let's go ahead and take that over to our plastic wrap. I'm just going to give it a few wraps around just so I know that it is going to be nice and airtight and it's going to stay moist. Alright, that's all we need to do. So in about 24 hours we'll be able to take off this newspaper and this plastic wrap, cut our string and throw it in the washing machine, and we have a completed tie-dye. That's all there is to it. When you do a nice scrunch area or the chaos area of this earth tapestry, as we're doing here, it's always good to start with your lighter colors first. So I'm going to put just a drop of some brighter colors, which I'm going to layer some darker colors over. I don't want to put too much of a bright color in the center because it'll really stand out. So I've got a little bit of color in there, but I'm going to try to hide it. I'm going to try to conceal it a bit now with some darker colors. I'm going to add some real bright colors on my earth band. I'm I'm actually going to make a nice rainbow earth. So I'm going to start with a brighter color. I'm going to start with red on the outside and work my way in, just because if I put it on the inside, that inside of my earth is going to stand out much more than my outside, just like when you look at a rainbow. And for this piece, because it's only folded in 1/8, I really don't need to get the nozzle in there too much. Just need to let the color flow on its own. And don't worry if one color blends into another, it'll add to the effect. Get a little more purple. And I'm going to do the other side. I'm going to keep my red on the outside. And if you feel like your fabric's a little thick, you can always give it a little bit of a poke. And I'm going to put a little red on the inside now, but it's only half of one ring. It's not on both sides. And I'm just going to work some complementary colors. Makes it nice and easy for your first pieces just to stick with a nice easy color scheme. Putting yellow into green brightens it up, makes it almost like a fluorescent tint. We'll put a little bit of blue in here. And that'll be a nice color bleed. Give it a light squeeze, not too hard so it'll fall apart. Just enough so that the color is going to flow through. You can always go back in and put a little bit more. Or a little bit more. And let's do our outer bleed. Now for this particular piece, I'm going to do a kind of atmospheric sky scene. I'm going to start with a little bit of blue. And I'm going to put a little bit of purple. I'm going to layer my color on my bleed. And I'm actually going to put a little bit of black, which is going to give it a little gray. It's very difficult to dye. Even in pigment dyeing, it's very difficult to get an accurate black. And the same thing, let's do this. This kind of blue, purple, black, or dark gray ends up to result like a nice sky, or a night sky. And I'm gonna bleed all that color together. And if I need a little bit more, because it's still a lot of white, I can add that in. So in this instant, I'm gonna add a little bit of purple. And I'm gonna add a little bit of that black color as well. Do that on both sides. And that should have gotten rid of all my white in that bleed area. A little bit of white's okay, but in a bleed, solid colors will definitely be the sharpest. So let's go ahead and open that piece up. Depending on your weather, it can take anywhere from 15 minutes to about 30 minutes for it to fully dry. And once it dries, you're good to go. No chemical treating necessary. So you can see it's a very simple technique. Almost anybody can do it. And it doesn't involve all those tough chemicals that typical tie dyeing does. And let's go ahead and open this piece up. I'm going to grab a little bit windy today, so I think I'm going to open my piece up right here. There's half of our earth piece here. I can tell it's going to be quite a lovely piece. And let's just go ahead and open this piece up. We're going to have a real nice chaos in the center of our earth, and that'll give it that planetary effect. Gorgeous bleed on the outside. Small bit of white, but that's okay. Watch that wind. I'm going to keep it nice and low so the wind doesn't grab my piece here. And there we go. A real nice earth piece. In that center there, you'll get nice symmetrical shapes. Sometimes you get skeletons or bears or figurines. We have a little bit of a cross shape around a nice rainbow earth. What I'm doing here is putting our color into between our color lines of a kaleidoscope piece. And I'm just going with a simplified rainbow scheme. Accordion fold, we don't need to really get the tips in, just color bleeds real nice through there. Let's go ahead and do the other side. And if we want to make it a real complex kaleidoscope, what we're going to do is we're going to actually put different colors on the opposite side of those other colors. And when I start with a real simple color scheme, I'm going to actually go with complements. So putting blue over my orange here. But I would like a lot of red, so I'm going to leave my red there. And this will really brighten up that piece. Be sure to get the nozzle of this bottle into that fabric to ensure that you have enough dye in your piece. Around my ring, I went with a kind of a turquoise, a phthalo or a darker blue, and a dioxazine purple. I'm actually going to do that same color scheme going backwards. And don't worry too much if the one color bleeds into the next, because it only really does that on the surface. It'll actually create a nice color effect. Get some orange in there. I'm going to put a little bit of yellow over this blue and purple, in fact. So I'm putting it on 2 color bands. And then I'm going to go back to my nice raspberry and put that into this purple just to give it a little bit of redness off that red. And I'm going to add a little bit of green in there just to ensure there's enough color. Give it a good squeeze. Make sure that color bleeds through there. And we still have a nice bleed area to do. So what I think we should do is actually use some of the colors we've used in our piece. Maybe we'll use the green into that dark blue into a little purple. Would be quite nice. Let's try that. So let's concentrate on the top here. Going into blue. Put a little purple up into our bleed to add a little continuity to this piece. And we'll flip it over and we'll do the exact same thing on that bleed. Start at the top with the green. Get a good flow in there. And go to our dark blue. Into our purple. On our outside, I'll get it down in the bottom areas. And this is the outside border area surrounding the circle and surrounding the kaleidoscope on this piece. And we'll branch a little purple up, again to give it a little continuity. And then we'll squeeze that color to get rid of all the white areas. We can open that up. It looks like we did a pretty good job there. Let's go right ahead and open that piece up and then see what it looks like. Just be real careful not to cut your fabric as we've gone through all this effort. I hate to spoil a piece by cutting through it. And I could tell you right now that this is going to be a wonderful looking piece. So what I have there is 1/4 of the overall piece, and what I'm going to do is slowly kind of back fold it. Here's half of our piece. What we have here is a 3-circle ring around a kaleidoscope. We can put it in the dryer if we'd like to get out the wrinkles, but realistically we don't need to wash it or do anything to it. It's a finished piece. You just want to put enough color so it runs through the fabric. When the fabric's real tight, you'll need to put the nozzle in like I've just done on this one color here. And you can just get that nozzle in there and give it a little bit of a squeeze. It does relatively dye itself. And this pigment dyeing is such an easy technique that you just put the nozzle in there and let it work its magic all by itself. Just remember, in the thicker fabric areas, be sure to give it a little bit more of a squeeze because you have more fabric to cover. But it does quite easily just bleed right through, unlike dye. If we were using dye with this type of folding and technique, if we were using a Procyon dye, it would be very difficult to get the dye to penetrate evenly on all of the different layers. I'm going to brighten this piece up a notch by adding a little bit of yellow, but a little bit more blue because I'm going to put some bright color into that. Although this piece looks very blue and purple and green oriented, it's really going to flow differently when I do the other side. Let's go on the other side. In order to create a nice center, because this is actually the center of a petal of the mandala, I'm going to use the same color I used on the opposite side. Now you could actually use all of the same colors that you used on the other side on the reverse, but what would happen is you would have a solid line, a solid petal line, or in this case concentric solid petal lines. And in order to give it a little complexity, I'm going to actually use different colors. So let's go ahead and get in there with some more color and put it in your folded piece. Yellow and blue do mix to get a little bit of a funky green, which you can see right there. And I'm going to set off a little raspberry on the end, which is actually the center of my mandala. And then I'm going to put a little bit of red right next to this raspberry. Let's get to our bleed. And I'll put a little purple on my back. It's very nice. It's nice to experiment with color in that having brighter colors more towards your center and darker colors on the outside add in a little bit of a depth perception, making it another dimensional piece. It gives it a little popping out effect when you see it on a wall. This nice acrylic paint is non-toxic, so if you get a little bit on your skin, just get a rag and wash it off or scrub it off a little bit in the shower. Squeeze our bleed area to get rid of all of our white spots. Let's go ahead and cut the string and open that piece up. If you get to a tight area, just use a pair of dull scissors so you don't risk cutting your nice piece up after you spent all that time and effort. And I'll open this up till I get to about a quarter. Then I'm gonna unfold it. And there we go. We have an 8-pointed mandala with a little bit of a snowflake, web-like snowflake in the center. Quite a vibrant piece. Okay, our tie-dye shirts have been resting 24 hours now, and it's time to remove the plastic wrap and the newspaper, or plastic bag and newspaper, whichever you've used, and rinse them in the washing machine. And what we're simply going to do is we're going to turn on a high setting, as hot as possible and as full of a load as possible, and we're going to add a little Synthropol. It's just a little liquid detergent which is going to aid the white areas of the shirt to remain white. So it's going to keep the loose dye in suspension. And we're going to run it through a fill and rinse twice prior to a spin. We don't want to run the shirt through the spin cycle until we've actually removed as much dye, as much of the loose dead dye as possible. Okay, we're going to set our washing machine. We're going to put it on the extra large load size. We're going to put it on the hottest temperature of the washing machine and our longest time setting on a normal wash setting. We're actually going to stop it prior to finishing the fill and the wash and the rinse prior to the spin, and by doing that we're able to run that twice through the wash and the rinse without spinning the piece, which could backstain our fabric. So we're going to avoid spinning our piece until we remove as much dye as possible through 2 wash and rinse cycles. We're going to begin opening up our plastic wrap here, removing our tie-dye piece and removing the newspaper, cutting all the string and putting it into a washing machine load. So let's go ahead and get that going and begin washing and rinsing the beautiful tie-dye that's been sitting for 24 hours. Okay, let's take a finger's full of our Synthropol detergent, about the size of my thumb there. And really, if you put it straight in the washing machine, you're going to keep your whites. We're using Synthropol to keep our white areas to prevent it from backstaining. So there's really no reason why, unless you're doing 1 or 2 pieces only, why you should get them in the sink and spend all that time to rinse it by hand. Just go straight for the machine. After, of course, you use the washing machine, you'll want to run your washing machine through a few times to remove any dye in the washing machine prior to washing regular clothing. And let's go ahead and begin putting in some pieces for our rinsing. You can see that the newspaper has soaked up, absorbed a lot of that dye, and that's really kept our piece nice and moist for our 24-hour rest period. It's very, very dark at this point, but after you run it through the wash and rinse cycles twice, as well as the dryer, this piece will be very vibrant and have a really nice contrast of detail in our chaos, our scrunched area. So let's go ahead and cut that string. Just be careful not to cut your fabric. We're going to cut about 10 t-shirts and put about 10 in one load size for rinse. You want to remove as much string as you can, because the string also carries loose dye, and the least amount of loose dye we possibly put in the washing machine, the better. We'll open that up, shake a little string off. Now this piece looks very, very dark at this point, but I can tell that after a couple washes and a dry, this is going to be a very nice dark green, light green, medium green piece. So let's go ahead and put that in and run our machine. All right, we've finished our tie-dye now, and we're going to open up the dryer and see what our tie-dye came out as. And it's going to be very surprising to see what came out of 2 washes and rinses and a full dry cycle. So let's take a look. And this is really the best part of the process. That's electric. Far cry from what we saw putting into the washer. Oh, this one's quite interesting. This is an earth piece. I think the nicest thing is that every piece is really unique. Oh, here's a pretty one. We have a nice accordion fold around the middle. Nothing fancy. Oh, here's another bright one. This is an all scrunch or all chaos piece. Quite pretty. Nice woman's earth shirt with a beautiful chaos and the same color scheme on the bleed. This is a very nice example of where you use a nice light blue and purple on the inside as well as the outer bleed. Really a pretty rainbow in there. Oh, here's a beauty. It's a traditional spiral shirt. Gorgeous. Oh, here was that dark lightning bolt shirt that you really couldn't see much of when we put it in the wash machine. You can see it's quite vibrant. Very different. Just like all the shirts, are very unique.